My name is Rosa Martinez. I'm 60 years old, and I always believed that family was forever. That is, until the day my son Francisco raised his hand against me, not once or twice, but 15 times. Each slap was accompanied by the laughter of his wife, Mariana. What they didn't know was that the house where they humiliated me was still in my name, and my revenge would be served not with screams, but with the icy silence of legal documents. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. What would you do if your own child betrayed you like this? Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand how we got there. For 30 years after my husband died, I lived in a modest apartment in Georgetown. I worked as an elementary school teacher, saving every penny I could. That apartment was my sanctuary, filled with memories of a life well lived, pictures of Francisco growing up, and the small treasures I'd collected over the years. Francisco was always an ambitious child, smart, determined, sometimes a little too focused on getting ahead. When he married Mariana 5 years ago, I was happy for him. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to make my son happy. At least that's what I thought at first. "Mom, it doesn't make sense for you to keep struggling with the stairs in that old building," Francisco told me over dinner one evening. "The property values in Georgetown are skyrocketing. You could sell the apartment and move in with us." I hesitated. I valued my independence, but Francisco persisted. "We have plenty of room," he said. "You'd have your own space. And with what you get from selling your place, we could upgrade to an even better house." It sounded reasonable. The arthritis in my knees was getting worse, and the thought of no more stairs was appealing. Besides, wouldn't it be nice to be closer to my son? The apartment sold for much more than I expected, $480,000, a fortune to me after living modestly all my life. With my savings added, I had over $500,000. "This is perfect timing," Francisco said. "I found a beautiful house in a great neighborhood. It needs some work, but with your money and our income, we can make it perfect." I agreed to contribute $450,000 toward the new house. In return, my name would be on the deed, and I would have a comfortable place to live in my later years. "For tax purposes, we should put the house in my name," Francisco suggested. "But we'll do a private contract between us. It'll save us thousands in estate taxes later." I trusted my son. I signed the papers he put in front of me. What I didn't realize was that the final property transfer was never completed. The original deed remained in my name, tucked away in a folder I kept in my dresser drawer. The first few months in the new house were pleasant enough. I had a bedroom with an attached bathroom on the first floor. I planted flowers in the garden. I cooked traditional Mexican dishes that Francisco had loved since childhood. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small comments from Mariana. "Rosa, do you really need to use so many spices? The smell gets into the curtains." Or, "That sweater looks a bit outdated, doesn't it? Maybe it's time to update your wardrobe." I brushed these comments aside. She was young, just 35. What did she know about the comfort of a well-worn sweater? Then I noticed Francisco changing. He became irritable when I was around. He'd roll his eyes when I spoke at dinner. Sometimes he'd cut me off mid-sentence. "Mom, no one cares about Mrs. Hernandez's garden problems," he'd say. Or, "Can we talk about something else besides your old students?" I started spending more time in my room to avoid the tension. The large house began to feel smaller by the day. One afternoon, I overheard Mariana on the phone in the kitchen. "It's exhausting having her here all the time," she was saying. "She's so old-fashioned, and she acts like it's still her house just because she contributed money." I froze in the hallway, my heart beating fast. "I know, right? Francisco says once we've been here 5 years, it'll legally be ours completely regardless of the original agreement. Then we can suggest she move to assisted living. I backed away silently, my hands shaking. That night I searched through my papers and found the folder with the house documents. Reading through them carefully, I realized something crucial. The house was still legally mine. Whatever private agreement Francisco had drafted had never been properly notarized or registered. I should have confronted them then, but I was afraid. Francisco had always been my sweet boy. I couldn't believe he would intentionally try to cheat me. Instead, I started watching more carefully. I noticed how Mariana would place my belongings in inconvenient locations, how Francisco would exclude me from decisions about the house, my house, how they would have friends over and introduce me as Francisco's mother who lives with us, never acknowledging my contribution. I met Sarah Johnson at the community garden 3 blocks from our house. She was about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "You look troubled today, Rosa," she said one morning as we both tended to our tomato plants. Something about her gentle manner broke through my reserve. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything: the house, Francisco's behavior, Mariana's comments. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "My dear, what they're doing isn't just unkind, it's financial abuse. It's common with older parents, unfortunately." "Financial abuse? But he's my son." "Which makes it worse, not better," Sarah replied. "Have you spoken to a lawyer?" I shook my head. "I don't want to cause trouble. Family is everything to me." Sarah put her hand on mine. "Family should treat each other with respect. You deserve that much." Her words stayed with me, but I still couldn't bring myself to take action. What if I was overreacting? What if confronting Francisco drove a permanent wedge between us? Then came the leaking faucet incident. It was a Sunday evening in September. I had made Francisco's favorite lasagna with extra white sauce, the way he'd loved it since he was a boy. Mariana arrived first, her expensive perfume announcing her presence before she even entered the kitchen. "For my dearest mother-in-law," she said, placing a bottle of cheap wine on the table. She knew perfectly well that I couldn't drink because of my blood pressure medication. I thanked her anyway, as I always did to keep the peace. Francisco came home half an hour later, already agitated. He threw his keys on the counter with such force that they slid off onto the floor. "Tough day?" I asked cautiously. "Don't start, Mom," he snapped. We ate in uncomfortable silence. The lasagna that I'd spent hours preparing sat largely untouched on Francisco's plate. I searched for something neutral to say. "The kitchen faucet is leaking again," I mentioned. "We should call a plumber before it gets worse." Francisco's head snapped up. "The faucet in my house, you mean?" he said, emphasizing the word in a way that made my stomach clench. "It's just a faucet, Francisco," I said quietly. "It needs fixing, that's all." That's when he slammed his hand down on the table so hard that the silverware jumped. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he shouted, standing up so quickly his chair tipped backward. "You think you can tell me what to do in my own house?" I glanced at Mariana. She was dabbing her mouth with her napkin, but I could see the slight curl of her lips. She was enjoying this. "Have you forgotten that I took you in when no one else would?" Francisco continued, his voice rising. "Have you forgotten that you could be in a nursing home right now?" I remained silent, my eyes fixed on my plate. The lasagna I had prepared with so much love now seemed like a tasteless mess. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he demanded, grabbing my chin roughly to force my face upward. That's when it happened. The first slap came as a shock, not so much from the pain, but from the disbelief. Never in his entire life had my son raised his hand against me. I felt my cheek sting as tears welled up in my eyes. Mariana gasped theatrically, covering her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were gleaming with satisfaction. "Francisco, "Please," I whispered. The second slap was harder. Then came the third and fourth in quick succession. I lost count after the 10th. My ears were ringing, and my whole face felt like it was on fire. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I sat there, rigid as a statue, as my own son unleashed his rage on me. With each slap, I felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, but the blindness that had prevented me from seeing what my son had become. When he finally stopped, he was breathing heavily, like he'd run a race. "This is so you learn to respect who's in charge here," he said, adjusting his shirt cuffs as if he'd just completed a business transaction. Mariana was smiling openly now, not bothering to hide her pleasure at my humiliation. I stood up silently, leaving my plate untouched, and walked slowly to my bedroom at the back of the house. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally let the tears fall. But they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of a decision that was crystallizing in my heart, like ice forming on a winter night. As I touched my swollen face, I remembered the dresser drawer where I kept the original deed to the house. The document that proved that legally, this place was still mine. I took it out and placed it in a folder alongside my passport, birth certificate, and bank statements. That night, as I listened to Francisco and Mariana laughing in the living room as if nothing had happened, I lay in bed fully clothed, planning every step of what I would do next. It wouldn't be a loud or violent revenge. It would be silent and definitive, like the ice that now occupied the place where maternal love had once lived. The hours dragged by as I mentally prepared myself. When the sun rose, I heard Francisco moving around in the hallway, then the sound of the shower, and finally the front door closing. Mariana left shortly after, the sound of her expensive heels clicking on the hardwood floors. I waited another 30 minutes to make sure they wouldn't return for something forgotten. Then I took the folder with my documents, put on my warmest coat, the one Francisco called "that old rag," and slipped out the back door. The day was cloudy and cold, as if the weather was conspiring with my mood. I walked 3 blocks to Sarah's house, my swollen face throbbing with each step. She opened the door still in her bathrobe, but her sleepy expression changed to horror when she saw my face. "Rosa, my God, what happened to you?" she gasped, pulling me inside. "I need your help," I said simply. "Do you still have that lawyer friend you mentioned? The one who retired but still helps people occasionally?" "George Washington?" "Yes, of course." Her eyes went from my face to the folder I was clutching. "Let me call him right now." Within an hour, I was sitting in George Washington's home office. He was a distinguished-looking black man in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Martinez," he said gently after Sarah had made the introductions and discreetly left us to talk. "Sarah mentioned you might need some legal advice, but she didn't say—" He gestured toward my face. "My son did this," I said, the words feeling strange on my tongue. "Last night. 15 times he slapped me while his wife watched and laughed." George's expression hardened. "I'm deeply sorry that happened to you. No one deserves such treatment, especially not from family." I opened my folder and pulled out the house documents. "What I need to know is this. This house that my son claims is his, is it legally mine?" George carefully examined the documents, occasionally glancing up at me over his glasses. After several minutes, he nodded. "The deed is in your name, Mrs. Martinez. From what I can see here, your son never completed the legal process to transfer ownership. There's a private agreement here, but it was never notarized, and more importantly, no new deed was ever registered with the county. Legally, the house is still entirely yours." I felt a cold relief wash over me. "So I can sell it?" "Yes, you can," George confirmed. "Though I have to ask, are you sure that's what you want to do?" This is a significant decision. I lightly touched my cheek, which was still tender and swollen. I'm sure. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. I understand. You know, I have a former client, Jennifer Anderson. She's a real estate agent with Thompson Realty. If you're serious about selling quickly, she would be the person to contact. How quickly could it happen? I asked. That depends on finding a buyer, but Jennifer specializes in quick sales. With the right pricing strategy, perhaps a few weeks. A few weeks? Not the single day of the original story, but still fast enough. I nodded. There's something else you should know, George added, leaning forward. If your son discovers what you're planning, he might try to stop you. He could claim you're not competent to make this decision, especially if your name isn't on any recent bills or accounts associated with the property. I hadn't considered that. What should I do? Start documenting everything. The abuse, your financial contributions, conversations about the house. And I'd suggest staying with a friend until this is resolved. He glanced toward the front of the house where Sarah was waiting. Somewhere your son doesn't know about, if possible. I thought for a moment. I have a friend in San Francisco, Elizabeth Thompson. We've kept in touch over the years, but Francisco has never met her. That might be a good option to consider, George said. In the meantime, I'll contact Jennifer and set up a meeting for tomorrow if that works for you. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of grief and determination. This wasn't how I had imagined my golden years would be, selling my home to escape my abusive son, but it was necessary. Thank you, Mr. Washington, I said, gathering my documents. Please call me George. And Mrs. Martinez, what your son did, it's not just morally wrong, it's assault. You would be within your rights to file a police report. I shook my head. I don't want to see my son arrested. I just want justice, and to start over somewhere peaceful. George walked me to the door. I respect your decision, and I'll do everything I can to help you achieve that fresh start. When I returned to Sarah's living room, she was waiting with a cup of tea and an ice pack for my face. What did George say? She asked as I sat down heavily in her armchair. He says the house is legally mine. I can sell it. I sipped the tea, letting its warmth spread through me. He's going to connect me with a real estate agent tomorrow. Sarah sat across from me, her expression concerned. And then what? Where will you go? I have a friend in San Francisco. I thought I might stay with her until I figure out my next steps. That sounds like a good plan. Sarah hesitated, then asked, What about your things? Your clothes? Personal items? I hadn't thought that far ahead yet. I'll need to get them somehow. Maybe when Francisco and Mariana are at work. I can help, Sarah offered immediately. We can go tomorrow while they're out. Pack what you need, nothing more. I felt a rush of gratitude for this woman who had been a stranger just months ago, but was now offering me shelter and help without hesitation. Why are you doing this for me? I asked. Sarah's eyes grew distant. 20 years ago, my sister was in a similar situation with her husband. None of us saw the signs until it was too late. She stayed because she had nowhere to go. She refocused on me. No one should have to choose between abuse and homelessness. That night, sleeping in Sarah's guest room, I checked my phone for the first time since leaving the house. There were 3 missed calls from Francisco, but no messages. He probably assumed I was still in my room, nursing my wounded pride. The next morning, Sarah drove me to meet Jennifer Anderson at her real estate office. Jennifer was a brisk, efficient woman in her 40s who didn't comment on my still visible bruises, but whose eyes registered understanding. George briefed me on your situation, Mrs. Martins, she said once we were seated in her office. I want you to know that I specialize in exactly these kinds of sales where discretion and speed are priorities. How quickly could we sell? I asked. The market is strong right now. Jennifer replied, tapping her pen against her notepad. If we price it competitively, slightly below market value, I believe we could secure a buyer within 2 weeks. The closing could take another week or two after that. It wasn't as immediate as I had hoped, but it was still faster than a traditional sale. I'd like to see the property today if possible, Jennifer continued. Take some photos, get measurements. Is there a time when the house would be empty? I thought for a moment. Francisco usually works until 6:00 p.m. Mariana has yoga on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to noon. Today is Tuesday, Jennifer noted. If we went around 10:30, would that work? I nodded, feeling a flutter of anxiety at the thought of returning to the house. Perfect. I'll meet you there. She paused. Mrs. Martinez, I should mention that once we list the property, your son will know. We can't keep the sale secret once it's on the market. I understand, I replied. By then, I'll be ready. Before we went to the house, Sarah helped me open a new bank account at a different bank than the one Francisco and I shared. I deposited the small amount of cash I had with me, about $3,000 that I kept in my emergency fund. This is just the beginning, Sarah reassured me. Once the house sells, you'll have enough to start over comfortably. At precisely 10:30, Jennifer met us outside my house. I let us in with my key, feeling like an intruder in my own home. This is a lovely property, Jennifer commented as we walked through the rooms. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, updated kitchen. In this neighborhood, even with a quick sale discount, you should be looking at around $750,000. The number took my breath away. My $450,000 contribution had grown significantly in just 2 years, largely due to the renovations Francisco had insisted on. Renovations paid for mostly with my money. I need to get some of my personal belongings while we're here, I told Jennifer as she took photos of the living room. Is that okay? Of course. Take your time. I'll be at least 30 minutes documenting everything. Sarah helped me pack efficiently. Clothes, important mementos, photo albums, jewelry. I took only what was unquestionably mine. Nothing that Francisco had given me or that belonged to the house. Everything fit into 2 suitcases and a small box. As I was closing the second suitcase, I noticed a manila envelope on Francisco's desk in the study. The label caught my eye. House Sale Research. My heart pounding, I opened it. Inside were printouts of real estate listings, notes about property values, and an email from a real estate agent dated just last week. As discussed, once the 5-year occupancy requirement is met, you should be able to sell without any complications from the previous owner. They were already planning to sell the house, my house, out from under me. The 5-year timeline Mariana had mentioned on the phone wasn't just about assisted living. It was about legally claiming full ownership. I quickly took photos of the documents with my phone and returned the envelope exactly as I'd found it. When we left, I took one last look at the garden I'd planted. The roses were starting to bloom, their deep red petals opening to the spring sunshine. I wouldn't see them reach full bloom. Jennifer listed the house the following day. As expected, with the competitive pricing and desirable neighborhood, we received multiple offers within the first week. By day 10, we had a solid offer from a couple named James and Catherine Miller, $735,000, with a request for a quick closing. They can pay mostly in cash, Jennifer told me during our call. They're selling their current home and have substantial equity. They'd like to close in 2 weeks if possible. That sounds perfect, I said. I was staying at Sarah's house, rarely going out for fear of running into Francisco or Mariana. I had received several angry calls from Francisco the day after the house was listed. I let them go to voicemail. "Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing?" his first message demanded. "There's a for sale sign in front of my house. Call me immediately." The second message was more threatening. If you don't call me back in the next hour, I'm calling the police to report you missing and mentally unstable. This is insane. The third, left late at night, was slurred and emotional. You can't do this to me, Mom. This is my house, my life. You're going to ruin everything. Please, just call me. I didn't call him back. Instead, I had George send a formal legal letter explaining that the house was legally mine, that I was exercising my right to sell it, and that any harassment would result in a restraining order. The day after the Miller's offer was accepted, I received a different kind of call, from Mariana. "Rosa," she said, her voice honey-sweet in a way it had never been before. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Francisco was under so much stress that night. He's devastated by what happened." "Is he?" I replied, keeping my voice steady. "He's been seeing a therapist," she continued. "He's getting help for his anger. Please come home so we can talk about this like a family." "The time for talking was before he hit me 15 times, I said. "Not after you both realized I still own the house." There was a pause, then her tone changed completely. "You ungrateful old woman. After all we've done for you?" "Francisco was right. You've lost your mind. No judge will let you sell this house. We'll fight you every step of the way." I ended the call and blocked her number. The next day, I received an email from a lawyer representing Francisco, claiming that I wasn't mentally competent to sell the property and threatening legal action. George responded with medical documentation from my regular checkup just 2 months prior, showing I was in excellent cognitive health, plus bank records demonstrating my significant financial contribution to the purchase. He also mentioned the photographic evidence of my bruised face and witnesses to Francisco's verbal abuse. We didn't hear from Francisco's lawyer again. The weeks leading up to the closing were a strange limbo. I spent my days at Sarah's house, researching places where I might want to live, making plans for my future. I called my friend Elizabeth in San Francisco and explained the situation. "Come stay with me as long as you need," she insisted. "My guest room is yours, and we have a lot of catching up to do." I also found myself researching women's shelters and organizations that helped victims of elder abuse. I was one of the lucky ones. I had resources, friends, and the legal ownership of a valuable asset. Many women in my situation had none of those things. 3 days before the closing, I discovered something else. While going through my financial documents, I found evidence that Francisco had been using my credit card for personal expenses, restaurants, gifts for Mariana, even payments toward his car loan, small amounts each time, but adding up to over $12,000 in the past year alone. I reported the fraud to the credit card company, providing documentation that the charges couldn't have been made by me, as I was nowhere near those locations on those dates. The day of the closing, I sat in George's office across from the Millers. They were a pleasant couple in their 50s, excited about moving to a new neighborhood. "We can't thank you enough for accepting our offer," Catherine Miller said. "We've been looking for a house in this area for months." I smiled politely but didn't share the circumstances of the sale. As the stack of papers grew smaller with each signature, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. When the final document was signed, Jennifer handed me a check for $690,365, the sale price minus the real estate commission and closing costs. "Congratulations," she said. "The house is officially sold." George patted my hand. "You did it, Rosa. How do you feel?" I took a deep breath. "Like I can finally start healing." That same day, I deposited the check in my new bank account and booked a one-way bus ticket to San Francisco for the following morning. I didn't want to fly. I needed the time on the road to process everything that had happened. As Sarah drove me to the bus station, I asked her to stop by the house one last time. I didn't get out of the car, I just wanted to see it. The Miller's moving truck was already in the driveway. Catherine was directing movers carrying a sofa through the front door. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. I watched as a new family began making the house their home. "No," I said finally. "I only regret that it came to this." At the bus station, Sarah hugged me tightly. "Promise you'll stay in touch, and when you're settled somewhere new, I'll come visit." "I promise," I said, blinking back tears. She had been my rock through this entire ordeal. As the bus pulled away from the station, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, thinking it might be Francisco using someone else's phone. But something made me accept the call. "Mom!" Francisco's voice was ragged, desperate. "Where are you? I just went to get my things from the house, and there are strangers living there." "The house has been sold," I said calmly. "It was always my house, Francisco. You knew that." "But where am I supposed to live?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You can't just leave me homeless." "You're 38 years old with a good job," I replied. "You'll do what many people do. Rent an apartment, save money, rebuild. Just like I'm doing at 60. "This isn't over," he threatened. "I'm going to sue you. I'll prove you weren't mentally sound when you signed those papers." "You're welcome to try," I said. "But I have pictures of what you did to me, and witnesses to how you treated me before that night. Is that really the story you want to tell in court?" There was silence on the other end. Then, in a voice so low I could barely hear it, he asked, "Did you ever love me at all?" The question pierced straight through my heart. "I have loved you every day of your life, Francisco," I said, my voice breaking. "Even now. But love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be abused." I ended the call and turned off my phone as the bus merged onto the highway. Through the window, I could see the city growing smaller behind us. I thought about the road ahead, literally and figuratively. I was 60 years old, starting over with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a bank account that would give me options many women in my situation never had. As the landscape changed from urban to rural, I felt something unexpected, a sense of possibility. For the first time in years, my future wasn't tied to Francisco's needs or expectations. It was entirely my own. My face had healed, but the wounds inside would take longer. Still, as the bus carried me toward San Francisco and my friend Elizabeth, I felt the first stirrings of hope. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would write every word myself. The bus to San Francisco was nearly empty, giving me plenty of space to think. I chose a window seat, watching as familiar streets gave way to highways, then to the open countryside. Each mile put more distance between me and the nightmare I'd lived through, but the memory of Francisco's hand striking my face remained fresh. Elizabeth was waiting for me at the San Francisco bus terminal, her arms outstretched for a hug. We'd been friends since college, maintaining our connection through occasional calls and yearly Christmas cards. When she saw my face, the fading bruises still visible beneath my hastily applied makeup, she gasped. "Oh, Rosa," she whispered, gently touching my cheek. "Who did this to you?" "My son," I replied, the words still feeling strange on my tongue. "But that's a story for when we're somewhere private." Elizabeth lived in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in Noe Valley with a small balcony that offered a view of the city's rolling hills. That night, over cups of chamomile tea, I told her everything. The house arrangement, the slow deterioration of my relationship with Francisco, the night of the slaps, and my escape plan. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," Elizabeth said when I finished. "My home is your home." "Thank you," I replied, "but I can't hide forever. I need to figure out my next steps." "Do you have any ideas?" I stared into my tea, watching the steam rise in delicate curls. "I've always loved Texas. The wide open spaces, the warmer weather, maybe a small place outside Austin. Somewhere quiet where I can garden and read and heal." Elizabeth nodded. That sounds perfect for you. But first, let's focus on keeping you safe and getting through this house sale. The next morning, I called George to update him on my whereabouts. He had news. Francisco has been trying to challenge the sale, he said. He claims you took advantage of him, that there was a verbal agreement about the house being his. My heart sank. Can he stop the sale? No, George reassured me. I've submitted the documentation of your financial contribution, the original deed, and, with your permission, photos of your injuries. His lawyer has backed off considerably. Thank you, I whispered, relieved but saddened that it had come to this, using evidence of my son's violence against him in legal proceedings. There's something else, George added. Jennifer Anderson called. She's found a couple who are very interested in the house, the Millers. They're offering $735,000 with a quick closing. They've already been pre-approved for financing. That's wonderful news, I said, mental calculations running through my head. After paying off the remaining mortgage and setting aside money for taxes, I would have approximately $600,000 to start my new life. It was more than enough. They'd like to see the house again tomorrow, George continued. Jennifer will handle everything, but I wanted you to know. Is Francisco aware of this showing? Jennifer scheduled it during his working hours, George replied. But Rosa, you should prepare yourself. Once an offer is formally accepted, Francisco will need to be legally notified to vacate the premises. This could get contentious. I closed my eyes, imagining Francisco's rage when he realized he was being evicted from what he believed was his home. I understand. Just keep me informed. Over the next few days, I tried to establish a routine in Elizabeth's apartment. I helped with cooking and cleaning, went for walks in the neighborhood, and spent hours researching real estate in the Austin area. But my thoughts kept returning to Georgetown, to the house I had left behind, and to the son who had betrayed me so profoundly. One afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Martinez? A woman's voice asked. This is Catherine Miller. Jennifer Anderson gave me your number. My husband and I are the ones interested in purchasing your home. I was surprised by the direct contact. Yes, Mrs. Miller. Jennifer mentioned you. I hope the second viewing went well. It did. It's a beautiful home, she said warmly. But there's something I wanted to discuss with you directly. When we were viewing the property yesterday, a woman showed up. She said she was your daughter-in-law. My stomach clenched. Mariana. Yes, that was her name. She seemed upset about the sale. She told us some concerning things. I could only imagine what Mariana had said. That I was mentally unstable, that the house wasn't really mine to sell. What kind of things, Mrs. Miller? There was a pause. She said you were selling the house out of spite, that you had abandoned your son without warning, that you might not be mentally competent to make this decision. I took a deep breath, fighting the anger rising in my chest. Mrs. Miller, I understand your concern. The truth is complicated and personal, but I can assure you that I am the legal owner of the property and fully competent to sell it. My lawyer has all the documentation to prove this. I believe you, she said quickly. There was something about that woman that seemed off. The way she spoke about you, it didn't sit right with me. My mother is about your age, and I could never imagine speaking about her that way. Relief washed over me. Thank you for your understanding. We still want the house, Catherine continued. In fact, we're prepared to make a formal offer today. I just wanted to speak with you first, person to person. After hanging up, I called Jennifer immediately to tell her about the conversation. The Millers are still interested, I concluded. But Mariana knows they're potential buyers. She's trying to sabotage the sale. Don't worry about Mariana, Jennifer said confidently. I've dealt with situations like this before. The Millers are serious buyers, and Catherine actually called me right after speaking with you. They're submitting their offer today, $735,000 with a 30-day closing period. That's wonderful news, I said. Then a thought occurred to me. Jennifer, is there any way to expedite the closing? I'm concerned that Francisco and Mariana might try to damage the property once they realize the sale is going through. I can speak to the Millers, Jennifer replied. If they're able to close faster, we could potentially move the timeline up to 2 weeks instead of 30 days. Would that help? Immensely, I said. Later that afternoon, George called to confirm that the Millers' offer had been officially submitted and that he had already prepared a counteroffer accepting their price, but requesting a faster closing period. If all goes well, he explained, we could close in as little as 2 weeks. But Rosa, there's something else you should know. There was a gravity in his voice that made me sit up straighter. What is it? I've been doing some additional research on Francisco's finances. It appears he's been struggling lately. There are several late payments on the mortgage, which is still in your name, by the way, and he's maxed out 3 credit cards. This was news to me. Francisco had always presented himself as successful, comfortable. How do you know this? As your lawyer handling this sale, I had to check for any liens or financial encumbrances on the property. There aren't any yet, but his financial situation doesn't look good. It might explain some of his behavior. I thought about Francisco's increasing irritability over the past few months, the long hours he claimed to be working, the tension that seemed to follow him home. Had financial stress contributed to his outburst? It wasn't an excuse. Nothing could excuse what he did, but it provided context. There's something else, George continued. The private contract he had you sign, it includes a clause stating that after 5 years of him making mortgage payments, you would transfer full ownership to him, regardless of your initial investment. The 5-year timeline Mariana had mentioned on the phone. It hadn't been a casual comment. It had been a specific plan. He was planning to take the house from me all along, I said quietly. It appears so, George confirmed. Though the contract isn't legally binding since it was never properly executed, it does show intent. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Francisco, not the angry man who had struck me 15 times, but the little boy who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories, the teenager who had helped me plant a vegetable garden after his father died, the young man who had looked so proud at his college graduation. Where had that son gone? When had he become someone capable of striking his own mother? The next morning I received a text from Sarah. Rosa, something strange is happening at the house. There's a moving truck, but it doesn't look like they're moving everything. Can you call me? I called immediately. What's going on? I was walking by on my way to the community garden, Sarah explained. There's a small moving truck outside your house. Mariana is supervising some men carrying out what looks like artwork and some smaller furniture pieces. Not enough for a full move, just selected items. My heart began racing. They're taking the valuable things. They must know the sale is going through. Should I call the police? Sarah asked. I thought quickly. Most of the truly valuable items were ones I had already removed or were clearly mine. The artwork was primarily pieces that Francisco and Mariana had purchased together. No, I decided. As long as they're not taking anything that's clearly mine, let them go. I just want this to be over. But curiosity got the better of me. Sarah, if you have time, could you watch a little longer, just to see what else they take? Sarah agreed and promised to call me back. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Rosa, you won't believe this, Sarah said, her voice hushed as if she was trying not to be overheard. Mariana isn't taking the items to another house. She's loading them into a storage unit facility down the street. I followed at a distance, and she's not alone. There's a man with her, definitely not Francisco. They seem intimate. I felt a strange twisting sensation in my stomach. Are you saying she's having an affair? I can't be certain, Sarah hedged, but they were holding hands when they thought no one was looking, and the way he touched her back when they were walking, it wasn't casual. Mariana was cheating on Francisco. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction, karma working its mysterious ways. But another part felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for my son. Whatever he had done to me, being betrayed by your spouse was a special kind of pain. There's something else, Sarah added. I overheard them talking when they were closing the storage unit. Mariana said something like, as soon as we sell the house, we'll have enough to start over somewhere else. Rosa, I think they're planning to sell the house and leave Francisco behind. The pieces suddenly fell into place. The house sale research folder I had found in Francisco's study. What if it hadn't been Francisco's research at all? What if Mariana had been the one planning to sell the house out from under both of us? I called George immediately to share this new information. This complicates things, he admitted. If Mariana is removing items from the house, it could affect the sale. The Millers made their offer based on seeing the house as it was, furniture included. What should we do? I'll contact Jennifer and have her reach out to the Millers to explain that some furniture might be different. If necessary, we can offer a slight reduction in price to compensate. As for Mariana's apparent plans, that's between her and Francisco. Our focus needs to be on completing this sale as quickly and smoothly as possible. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and anxiety. The Millers agreed to a 14-day closing period, meaning the house would legally change hands much sooner than originally planned. Jennifer confirmed that they understood some furnishings might be different and were still comfortable proceeding with the sale. Meanwhile, I continued researching properties in Texas. With Elizabeth's help, I narrowed my search to a few small ranches outside Austin. One in particular caught my attention. A modest house on half an acre of land with a stream running along the back of the property. It looks peaceful, Elizabeth commented, looking over my shoulder at the online listing. Like somewhere you could heal. It does, doesn't it? I agreed. And at $250,000, it would leave me with plenty in savings for renovations and living expenses. I contacted the listing agent and scheduled a virtual tour for the following week. If all went well with the house sale in Georgetown, I could potentially make an offer on the Texas property immediately after. 5 days before the scheduled closing, my phone rang with Francisco's number. I had been expecting this call for days. Taking a deep breath, I answered. Hello, Francisco. There was a moment of silence, then my son's voice, strained, barely controlled. Mom, we need to talk about what's happening. I think it's fairly clear what's happening, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I'm selling my house. Your house? He exploded. I've been making the mortgage payments for 2 years. We had an agreement. An agreement you created, had me sign without fully explaining, and never properly executed, I pointed out. Legally, the house is mine, and after what happened, I have every right to sell it. It was one night, he protested. I was under stress. I lost control. I've apologized. Why are you doing this to me? His framing of the situation, as if I were the one harming him, ignited a slow, burning anger in my chest. It wasn't one night, Francisco. It was months of disrespect, of treating me like an unwanted guest in a house I largely paid for. It was 15 slaps across my face while your wife watched and laughed. And it was a plan to take full ownership of my property after 5 years, regardless of my wishes. How did you— I found the contract, I interrupted. The one with the 5-year clause. I also know about your financial troubles. The maxed out credit cards, the late mortgage payments. His breathing was audible through the phone. You don't understand. The company has been struggling. There were layoffs. I was trying to protect you from worrying." "By planning to take my house?" I asked incredulously. "It wasn't like that," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "There's something else you should know," I said after a moment. "Something about Mariana." "What about her?" I hesitated. Did I really want to tell my son that his wife was cheating on him? That she was secretly moving valuables to a storage unit with another man? It would crush him, and despite everything, a small part of me still wanted to protect him from pain, but he deserved the truth. Mariana has been seen removing items from the house. Artwork, small furniture. She's storing them in a unit down the street. And she's not alone when she does this. She's with a man, Francisco, someone she appears to be involved with. The silence that followed was deafening. When Francisco finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're lying." "I wish I were," I said sincerely. "Sarah Johnson, my friend from the community garden, saw them together. She overheard Mariana saying that once the house sells, they'll have enough to start over somewhere else." "The house isn't hers to sell," Francisco said, but I detected uncertainty in his voice. "No, it isn't," I agreed. "It's mine, and it's being sold to a lovely couple named James and Catherine Miller in 9 days. You and Mariana will need to vacate the premises before then." "9 days?" he exclaimed. "That's impossible. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's for you to figure out," I replied. "Just as I had to figure out where to go after you assaulted me." The conversation ended shortly after, with Francisco alternating between pleading and threatening legal action. I hung up feeling emotionally drained but strangely unburdened. I had said what needed to be said. The following day, George called with troubling news. "Rosa, Francisco has filed an emergency petition to stop the sale. He's claiming emotional distress and that you're not mentally competent to make this decision." My heart sank. "Can he do that?" "He can try," George said, "but I don't believe he'll succeed. I've already submitted your recent medical records showing you're in excellent cognitive health, plus documentation of the abuse. The judge should dismiss his petition quickly. And if they don't, then we'll present our case in court. But Rosa, even a temporary injunction could delay the closing. The Millers might not be willing to wait." I closed my eyes, imagining all my careful plans crumbling. What can we do? "I've requested an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. If the judge rules in our favor, which I believe they will, we can proceed with the closing as scheduled." I spent that night pacing Elizabeth's guest room, too anxious to sleep. What if the judge sided with Francisco? What if the sale fell through? Would I have to return to Georgetown, to that house of painful memories? The next morning, George called at precisely 10:30 a.m. "The judge dismissed Francisco's petition," he announced without preamble. "She cited insufficient evidence of mental incapacity and noted the documented abuse. The sale can proceed as planned." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you, George, for everything." "There's more," he continued. "Francisco appeared at the hearing with a different lawyer. Mariana wasn't with him. When asked about her absence, he became agitated and left immediately after the ruling. I'm concerned about what might happen next." "What do you mean?" "If Francisco has discovered Mariana's activities, he might not react well, and they're both still in the house for another week." I hadn't considered this angle. If Francisco confronted Mariana about her affair, the situation could turn volatile. The house, my house, could be damaged in the fallout. "Should we be worried about the property?" I asked. "I've advised Jennifer to schedule a final walkthrough with the Millers just before closing," George replied. "If there's any significant damage, we can negotiate repairs from the proceeds. But Rosa, I'm more concerned about your safety. If Francisco connects Mariana's betrayal to you telling him about it..." "He doesn't know where I am," I reminded him. and I have no plans to return to Georgetown before the sale is complete." "Good," George said. "Stay where you are. Let us handle everything from here." 3 days before the closing, Sarah called with an update from Georgetown. "There was a huge fight at the house last night," she reported. "Shouting, things breaking. The neighbors almost called the police. This morning, Mariana left with a suitcase. She hasn't come back." "And Francisco?" "Still there as far as I can tell. His car's in the driveway." I felt a complex mixture of emotions: concern for my son, satisfaction that Mariana's deception had been exposed, worry about the state of the house before closing. "Sarah, I hate to ask this, but could you drive by occasionally, just to make sure everything's intact?" "Of course," she promised. "I'll keep an eye on things." The day before closing, Jennifer conducted the final walkthrough with the Millers. She called me immediately after. "Good news and bad news," she began. "The good news is that the Millers are still committed to the purchase. The bad news is that the house is in disarray." "How bad?" I asked, bracing myself. "Broken dishes in the kitchen, some holes in the walls that weren't there before, furniture overturned. Francisco was present for the walkthrough but didn't say much. He appeared to have been drinking." My heart ached for what my son had become. "Will the Millers still close tomorrow?" "Yes, but they're requesting a $5,000 credit for repairs. Given the circumstances, I think that's more than fair." I agreed immediately. At this point, $5,000 was a small price to pay to be free of this situation once and for all. That night, I received one final call from Francisco. His words were slurred, his emotions raw. "She's gone," he said without preamble. "Mariana left. She's been seeing her personal trainer for months. Did you know that? My wife and her fucking personal trainer." "I'm sorry, Francisco," I said, and meant it. "No, you're not," he replied bitterly. "You're getting exactly what you wanted. The house sold. Me humiliated. Everything falling apart." "I never wanted any of this," I told him. "I only wanted to be treated with respect in a home I helped create. And when that became impossible, I wanted to start over somewhere peaceful." "Where will I go?" he asked, his voice suddenly small, like the child he had once been. "After tomorrow, I have nowhere." Despite everything, my heart broke for him. "You'll do what I'm doing. Start over. Find a small apartment. Rebuild your life, one step at a time." "Alone?" "Yes, Francisco. Alone. Just like I'm doing at 60 years old." There was a long silence, broken only by what sounded like a muffled sob. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for what I did to you. Not just that night, but everything." It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. "I know," I said softly. "Goodbye, Francisco." The next day, while I was having breakfast with Elizabeth, my phone pinged with a text from Jennifer. "Closing complete. Congratulations, Mrs. Martinez. The house is officially sold." Just like that, it was over. The house in Georgetown no longer belonged to me or to Francisco. It was the Millers' home now, a place where they would create their own memories, hopefully happier ones than those I was leaving behind. Later that afternoon, George called to confirm that the proceeds, $730,000 minus the mortgage balance, closing costs, and the repair credit, had been deposited into my account. After everything, I had $597,832.47 to start my new life. "What will you do now?" George asked. I looked out Elizabeth's window at the San Francisco skyline, feeling a strange lightness. "I have a virtual tour of a small ranch outside Austin tomorrow. If I like it, I'll make an offer." "That sounds perfect for you," George said warmly. "And Rosa, I want you to know that what you did, standing up for yourself, refusing to be a victim, it was brave. Many women in your situation never find that courage." His words touched me deeply. "I had help," I reminded him. "You, Sarah, Elizabeth. I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe not," he conceded, "but you took the first step. Remember that." After hanging up, I sat on Elizabeth's balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and pink. For the first time since that terrible night in Georgetown, I felt truly at peace. The fear, anger, and hurt were still there, but they no longer defined me. Tomorrow, I would take another step toward my new life. A small ranch in Texas, a place to plant a garden, to read books on a quiet porch, to heal from old wounds and create new joys. I wasn't just escaping my past, I was embracing my future. At 60 years old, many would say my best years were behind me. But sitting there, watching the sun set on one chapter of my life and rise on another, I knew differently. My best years weren't behind me. They were just beginning. Elizabeth drove me to the bus station the next morning. The April sun was warm on my face as I stood on the platform, clutching my small suitcase and the folder containing all my important documents. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" Elizabeth asked, concern etched on her kind face. I squeezed her hand. "I need to do this part alone, but thank you for everything." The journey to Austin took nearly 2 days, with transfers and overnight stops. I watched the landscape change through the bus window, rolling hills giving way to the vast open spaces of Texas. There was something freeing about the expansiveness, as if the land itself was offering a fresh start. Madison Taylor, the real estate agent I'd contacted about the small ranch, met me at the Austin bus terminal. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 30s, with a friendly smile and practical boots beneath her professional skirt suit. "The property is about a 30-minute drive outside the city," she explained as we pulled away from the station. "It's been on the market for a few months. The owner is an elderly gentleman moving to Florida to be closer to his daughter." As we drove, the city gradually gave way to countryside. When Madison turned onto a dirt road lined with mature oak trees, my heart quickened. "This is it," she said, pulling up to a modest single-story house with a wide covered porch. The moment I stepped out of the car, I felt it, a sense of rightness, of coming home. The house itself was nothing special, about 1,500 square feet with 2 bedrooms, an outdated kitchen, and worn hardwood floors. But the land, half an acre with a gentle slope leading down to a clear stream, was breathtaking. "The previous owner was quite the gardener," Madison noted as we walked the property. "Those are fruit trees along the back fence. Peach, apple, and I think that's a fig. And this area here was his vegetable garden." I knelt down and touched the soil, rich and dark, perfect for growing things. In my mind's eye, I could already see rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. A hummingbird darted past, hovering momentarily by a flowering bush near the kitchen window. "What do you think?" Madison asked as we completed our tour. "It's perfect," I replied simply. "I'd like to make an offer." 2 weeks later, I signed the closing documents on my new home. The owner, Mr. Sullivan, had accepted my offer of $240,000, slightly below asking price but a clean deal with no contingencies. I paid in cash, using part of the proceeds from the Georgetown house. "I'm glad it's going to someone who'll appreciate the garden," Mr. Sullivan said after the papers were signed. He was in his 80s, with gnarled hands that spoke of decades working the soil. "My Martha loved those flower beds. Keep them blooming for her, will you?" I promised I would. That evening, I sat on my new porch in a rocking chair the previous owner had left behind, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and the gentle sound of the stream provided a soothing backdrop. For the first time since that terrible night in Georgetown, I felt truly at peace. This small ranch represented more than just a place to live. It was a statement. At 60 years old, I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future. I spent the first month settling in. The house needed work. Fresh paint, updated plumbing, a new refrigerator. I hired local contractors for the major repairs, but tackled many projects myself. There was something deeply satisfying about stripping old wallpaper and applying fresh paint, as if I was physically erasing the past and creating a clean slate. Sarah called regularly with updates from Georgetown. The Millers had moved into my old house and were already making changes, repainting the exterior, landscaping the front yard. Francisco, she reported, had rented a small apartment across town and was rarely seen in the neighborhood. "Have you heard from him?" she asked during one of our calls. "No," I replied, "and I don't expect to." But the truth was more complicated. Even after everything, Francisco was still my son. There were nights when I would wake from dreams of him as a child, his gap-toothed smile when he lost his first tooth, his proud face when he learned to ride a bicycle, the way he would climb into my lap for bedtime stories. Those memories existed alongside the man who had struck me 15 times while his wife laughed. I found unexpected companionship in my new community. My closest neighbors, the Johnsons, were a retired couple who lived on a larger property about a mile down the road. They stopped by my second week with a homemade apple pie and an invitation to Sunday lunch. "Out here we look after each other," Mr. Johnson said, his weathered face crinkling into a smile. "Anything you need, you just holler." Sunday lunch at the Johnsons became a regular event. Through them I met other neighbors, the Andersons, who raised horses on their 20-acre spread, the Wilsons, who owned the local hardware store, and Matilda Rodriguez, who ran a shelter for abused women in Austin. Matilda and I connected immediately. She was in her early 50s, a former social worker who had dedicated her life to helping women escape violent situations. "Most of the women who come to us are younger," she confided over coffee one afternoon. "They have children, limited resources, nowhere to go. But lately I've been seeing more older women in their 60s and 70s who've endured decades of abuse from spouses or, increasingly, adult children." Her words resonated deeply. "There's a special kind of pain when the abuse comes from your child," I said quietly. Matilda studied me thoughtfully. "You speak from experience." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Over the next hour, I told her my story. The house, Francisco's betrayal, the 15 slaps, my escape and fresh start. When I finished, Matilda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Rosa, would you consider sharing your story with some of the women at the shelter? Your experience, especially how you reclaimed your power and started over at 60, could be incredibly inspiring." I hesitated. Speaking publicly about such a painful experience was daunting, but if my story could help even one woman find the courage to leave an abusive situation, "I'll do it," I agreed. The following week, I visited the House of New Beginnings, Matilda's shelter in eastern Austin. The converted Victorian mansion had seen better days, but there was a warmth and safety about it that transcended the peeling paint and worn carpets. I spoke to a small group of women gathered in what had once been the formal dining room. Some were young, barely out of their teens. Others were middle-aged. 2 were older than me. All bore the invisible scars of abuse, and many had visible ones as well. I hadn't prepared a formal speech. I simply told my story, beginning with the sale of my apartment and ending with my new life at the ranch. When I finished, the room was silent. Then an elderly woman in the back raised her trembling hand. "How did you find the courage?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought carefully before answering. "It wasn't courage I found first," I said. "It was dignity. the realization that I deserved better than what I was getting. The courage came afterward, when I decided to act on that knowledge. She nodded, tears streaming down her lined face. Several other women asked questions, practical ones about finances, legal issues, where to start. I answered as honestly as I could, sharing not just the facts of my journey, but the emotional reality as well. The fear, the doubt, the grief for what I had lost, the hope for what lay ahead. Afterward, Matilda hugged me tightly. "That was exactly what they needed to hear," she said. "Especially the older women. So many of them believe it's too late to start over." "It's never too late," I replied with conviction. I began volunteering at the shelter regularly, not as a counselor or therapist, but as someone who had walked a similar path and come out the other side. Sometimes I just listened as women shared their stories. Other times I helped with practical matters, driving someone to a job interview, teaching basic computer skills, helping navigate the complex world of social services. About 3 months after I moved to Texas, I received an unexpected call from George. "Rosa, how are you settling into your new home?" he asked after the initial pleasantries. "Wonderfully," I replied. "The garden is thriving, and I've made good friends here." "I'm glad to hear it." He paused. "I'm calling because I thought you should know. Francisco came to see me yesterday." My heart skipped a beat. What did he want? To apologize, primarily. He seemed different, humbled. He mentioned he's been seeing a therapist regularly since what happened. I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to dismiss this as too little, too late. Another part, the mother who had raised and loved this man for 38 years, wanted desperately to believe he could change. "Did he ask about me?" I finally asked. "He did," George confirmed. "He wanted to know if you were safe and happy. I told him you were both, but didn't share your location. I hope that was the right decision." "It was," I assured him. "I'm not ready to see him yet. Maybe someday, but not now." After hanging up, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching hummingbirds dart among the flowers I'd planted. Francisco was getting help. It was more than I had expected, and yet less than I needed to forgive him completely. The months passed. Summer gave way to fall, and my small ranch transformed with each season. I planted a vegetable garden that yielded more tomatoes and peppers than I could eat alone. I shared the abundance with neighbors and learned to can and preserve what remained. I adopted a stray dog, a caramel-colored mutt with one floppy ear who showed up at my door one rainy evening. I named him Popcorn because he would jump with joy whenever he saw me coming with his food bowl. His unconditional affection was a balm for my still-healing heart. One evening in late September, Matilda called with an unusual request. "Rosa, I have a situation at the shelter," she began. "A woman arrived yesterday, Eleanor Alvarez, 72 years old. Her son had been keeping her virtually under house arrest, controlling her finances, isolating her from friends. She escaped when he went to work." "How awful," I said, thinking of how many variations there were on the theme of family betrayal. "She read your story in the article that ran in the Austin Chronicle," Matilda continued. "Remember the piece they did about the shelter?" I remembered. A local journalist had written about the House of New Beginnings and included a brief mention of my volunteer work and my own experience. "Eleanor is asking to speak with you," Matilda explained. "I wouldn't normally make this kind of request, but she's quite fragile, and your story seems to have given her hope. Would you be willing to come in tomorrow?" "Of course," I replied without hesitation. "I'll be there in the morning." Eleanor Alvarez was a tiny woman with carefully styled white hair and frightened eyes that darted nervously around the room. When I entered, she was sitting near the window, a tattered copy of the Austin Chronicle clutched in her thin hands. "Mrs. Alvarez?" I said gently. "I'm Rosa Martinez. Matilda said you wanted to speak with me. Her eyes widened. It's really you? The lady from the article? I smiled and sat in the chair beside her. That's me. She took my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. Your story saved my life. I read it over and over when August was out. Each word gave me a little more courage. Over the next hour, Eleanor told me her story. She had been a literature professor for 40 years before retiring. Her husband had died 5 years ago, and her son, August, had convinced her to sell her house and move in with him. What started as a seemingly normal arrangement had quickly deteriorated into control and abuse. The money from my house disappeared, she explained. August said he was investing it for me, but I never saw a statement, never received any income from it. When I started questioning him, he got aggressive, first just yelling, then pushing, until one day he locked me in my room for calling a former colleague. Her story was painfully familiar, the isolation, the financial control, the escalating abuse. What will you do now? I asked. A determined smile appeared on her wrinkled face. I'm going to sue August to get my money back. Matilda already put me in touch with a lawyer who works with the shelter. And after that? I've always wanted to live by the sea. San Diego, maybe. Before leaving, I gave Eleanor my phone number and the address of my ranch, telling her she would be welcome whenever she was ready for a visit. You gave me more than an article, she said as we parted. You gave me a future. Driving home, I reflected on our meeting. I had entered Eleanor's life through the pages of a newspaper, and somehow that had changed the course of her existence. It was a responsibility I had never imagined, but one that filled me with purpose. The visits to the shelter became a regular part of my life. Once a month, I would drive into Austin to speak with the women who sought refuge there. At Matilda's suggestion, I began a support group specifically for older women called Starting Together. We met every 2 weeks, sharing our stories, our fears, our small victories. In one of those meetings, a young woman who had accompanied her grandmother asked a question that caught me off guard. Mrs. Martinez, did you forgive your son? The room fell silent. It was a question they all wanted to ask, but had been afraid to voice. I thought about Francisco, about George's call, about the therapy Francisco was reportedly attending, about the little boy who had become the man who struck me. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, I replied honestly. I understand that he is trying to change. I accept that his remorse may be genuine, but some breaks can't be completely repaired. What we had will never exist in the same way again. But do you still consider him your son? The young woman persisted. I took a deep breath. Francisco will always be my son biologically, but our relationship, if we ever have one again, will be completely different, based on mutual respect and clear boundaries, not on family obligation or automatic forgiveness. And is that enough for you? I looked around the room at the women who had found the courage to break cycles of abuse in their own lives. It has to be, I replied, because my happiness no longer depends on him or his choices. It depends on me. As fall deepened into winter, I received an unexpected package in the mail. The return address was from Georgetown, but it wasn't Francisco's name on the label. It was Sarah's. Inside was a small, carefully wrapped box and a note. Rosa Francisco asked me to forward this to you. He didn't want to pressure you by asking for your address, but he was insistent that you should have this. I hope it's okay that I sent it. Love, Sarah. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold watch that I recognized immediately. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and finally me. I thought it had been lost during my hasty departure from Georgetown. A small note was tucked beside it. I found this among the things you left behind. I know how much it means to you. I'm sorry for everything. Francisco. I held the watch against my heart, feeling its familiar weight. It was more than just a timepiece. It was a connection to the women who had come before me, strong women whose lives I had never fully known, but whose blood ran in my veins. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Something told me to answer. "Mom?" Francisco's voice was hesitant, unsure. Rosa, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Sarah gave me your number. The watch, did you receive it?" "I did," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Thank you for returning it." There was an awkward silence, then Francisco spoke again. "I've been seeing Dr. Weiss. She's a therapist specializing in anger management and family trauma. She's helping me understand why I did what I did. Not to excuse it, but to make sure it never happens again." "That's good, Francisco," I said, meaning it. "I'm glad you're getting help." "I also wanted you to know that Mariana and I are divorced," he continued. Well, you were right about her affair. She left me for her personal trainer the day after you told me about them." I felt no satisfaction at this news, only sadness for the pain he must have experienced. "I'm sorry it ended that way." "Don't be," he replied with surprising clarity. "It needed to end. We were toxic together. She brought out the worst in me, and I became someone I never wanted to be." We talked for nearly an hour. Francisco told me about his new apartment, his job, his therapy sessions. He spoke of childhood memories I had forgotten, camping trips with his father, my bedtime stories, the vegetable garden we had planted together after his father died. "I'm moving to Charlotte," he said toward the end of our conversation. "I've been offered a position there. It's a fresh start, away from Georgetown and all the memories." "When do you leave?" I asked. "Next week," he replied. "That's partly why I wanted to call. I needed to tell you how sorry I am one more time before I go, not just for that night, but for everything before it. The disrespect, the way I let Mariana treat you, the plans we made behind your back." His words were sincere. I could hear it in his voice. But wounds like mine didn't heal overnight, no matter how genuine the apology. "I appreciate that, Francisco," I said. "I truly hope you find what you're looking for in Charlotte." "Mom," he began, then corrected himself. "Rosa, would it be possible to see you before I go, just for an hour or two? I understand if you're not ready." I wasn't ready. The thought of seeing him face to face still made my heart race with anxiety. "Not yet," I replied gently. "Maybe someday, but not now." He accepted this with grace I wouldn't have expected from him a year ago. "I understand. Just know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat on the porch long into the night, the stars appearing one by one in the clear Texas sky. Francisco's call had stirred emotions I thought I had put to rest. Not just anger and hurt, but also the maternal love that had been a constant in my life for nearly 4 decades. I still loved my son. That was the complicated truth. I loved him, but I could no longer trust him. I wanted him to heal and grow, but I needed to protect myself from further harm. It was a delicate balance that I was still learning to navigate. Spring came to the ranch with an explosion of colors and scents. The fruit trees burst into bloom, filling the air with their sweet fragrance. My vegetable garden flourished, and Popcorn spent his days chasing butterflies across the yard. One warm April afternoon, about 10 months after I had fled Georgetown, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the garden, harvesting early lettuce, when I heard a car coming up the dirt driveway. Popcorn barked excitedly, running toward the sound. My heart jumped to my throat as I recognized the figure getting out of the car. Francisco stood by his rental car, uncertain and hesitant. He looked thinner than I remembered, his face more lined. He held a small package in his hands. "I know you said you weren't ready," he called from a respectful distance. "I shouldn't have come without calling first. I can leave if you want." I straightened up slowly, removing my gardening gloves. "How did you find me?" "Matilda Rodriguez," he admitted. "I made a donation to her shelter last month, a significant one. We got to talking and eventually I told her who I was. She was reluctant at first, but I convinced her my intentions were good." I made a mental note to have a serious conversation with Matilda about boundaries. But now, Francisco was here, standing on my property, and I needed to decide what to do. "Why are you here?" I asked, remaining where I was, neither approaching nor sending him away. "It's your birthday next week," he said, holding up the small package. "I wanted to give you this in person, and I'm moving to Charlotte tomorrow. This was my last chance to see you before I go." My birthday. In the tumult of the past year, I had almost forgotten. April 15th. I would be 61 years old. I studied my son carefully. He stood awkwardly by his car, maintaining the distance I had established, respecting my boundaries in a way he never had before. There was a humility in his posture that was entirely new. "Come sit on the porch," I said finally, gesturing toward the house. "I'll make some tea." Relief flooded his face. "Thank you." We sat in rocking chairs on my porch, mugs of chamomile tea steaming in the cool evening air. Popcorn, after an initial period of suspicion, had decided Francisco was acceptable and was now sleeping at his feet. "Your place is beautiful," Francisco said, looking out over the property. "It suits you." "It's home," I replied simply. "More than Georgetown ever was." He nodded, his eyes taking in the flourishing garden, the small henhouse I had built last month, the stream glinting in the distance. "You look happy," he observed. "I am," I confirmed. And it was true. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I had found a peace and purpose that had eluded me for years. Francisco handed me the small package. "Happy early birthday." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover and a beautiful fountain pen. "I remember how you used to write when I was a kid," Francisco explained. "You always had a journal. You stopped after Dad died. I thought maybe you might want to start again." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched me. He had remembered something about me that I had almost forgotten myself. "Thank you," I said, running my fingers over the soft leather. "It's perfect." We talked as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my yard. Francisco told me about his new job in Charlotte, the small apartment he had rented, his plans to continue therapy there. I shared stories about my garden, my volunteer work at the shelter, the community I had built. As darkness fell, Francisco checked his watch. "I should go. I have a long drive back to Georgetown, and an early flight tomorrow." I walked him to his car, popcorn trotting alongside us. At the car, Francisco turned to face me. "I know I have no right to ask this," he said hesitantly. "But do you think someday we might have some kind of relationship again? Not like before. I know that's gone forever. But something new, based on who we are now?" I considered his question carefully. The anger and fear that had defined our relationship for the past year had faded. In its place was something more complex, caution mixed with a tentative hope. "I don't know, Francisco," I answered honestly, "but I'm open to the possibility. It would take time, and trust would have to be rebuilt slowly." He nodded, accepting this partial answer with grace. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." As he prepared to leave, he hesitated, then said, The book you're going to write in that journal, I hope it tells your story. The world needs to hear it, especially women who think it's too late to stand up for themselves. I was surprised by his insight. How did you know I was thinking about writing a book? A sad smile crossed his face. Because you're my mother, and you've always found a way to turn pain into something meaningful. After Francisco's car disappeared down the road, I returned to my porch and sat in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of my ranch, crickets chirping, the soft burble of the stream, Popcorn's contented sighs as he settled at my feet. I opened the journal Francisco had given me and felt the smooth blank pages. There was a story waiting to be told. Not just my story, but the story of Eleanor Alvarez, of the women at the shelter, of all those who had found the courage to start over when society told them it was too late. That night I began to write. The words flowed easily, painfully, cathartically. I wrote about the slaps, about the sale of the house, about my escape and rebirth on the ranch. I wrote without reservation, putting on paper pains I had never fully expressed. When I finished the first chapter, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the Texas sky in shades of pink and gold. I felt exhausted but oddly lightened, as if I had set down a burden I had been carrying for too long. Over the next 6 months, I continued writing, fitting it in between gardening, volunteering at the shelter, and my regular life. When the manuscript was complete, I showed it to Matilda, who connected me with a friend at a small publishing house in Austin. To my surprise, they wanted to publish it. "Your story can help other women find their own strength," the editor said during our first meeting, "especially older women who believe they are trapped in abusive situations." The book, titled Starting Over at 60, was published exactly 1 year after I had fled Georgetown. The launch took place at a small bookstore in Austin, the room filled with women of all ages, some from the shelter, some from the community, many strangers who had heard about the book through word of mouth. As I signed copies and spoke with readers, I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. My pain, my journey, had become a beacon for others still finding their way. At the end of the event, as the bookstore was emptying, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the door. Francisco, thinner and more subdued than when I had last seen him, was watching me from a distance, a copy of my book in his hands. Our eyes met across the now empty bookstore. He didn't approach, and I didn't call him over. But he nodded once, a gesture of respect and perhaps pride, before quietly leaving. That evening, back at my ranch, I hosted a small celebration dinner for the friends who had supported me throughout my journey, the Johnsons, Matilda, Eleanor Alvarez, who had indeed moved to San Diego but had returned for my book launch, and several women from the Starting Together group. We sat at a long table on my porch, sharing food and stories as the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. Looking around at these people who had become my chosen family, I felt a completeness I hadn't experienced in years. Later, after my guests had gone, I sat alone in my rocking chair, my grandmother's watch on my wrist, popcorn sleeping at my feet. The night was peaceful, the air scented with jasmine and the promise of rain. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the terrified woman fleeing Georgetown to the author and advocate I had become. It hadn't been easy. There had been dark nights of doubt and fear, moments when starting over at 60 seemed impossible. But I had done it. And in doing so, I had discovered a truth that I now shared with every woman who came to the shelter. It is never too late to reclaim your life, to demand respect, to find joy. As I looked out over my small kingdom, the garden I had planted, the fruit trees beginning to bear, the peaceful stream, I felt a deep gratitude for the unexpected gift that had come from my greatest pain, the chance to begin again, wiser and stronger than before. Time had taught me that the most effective response to cruelty isn't always dramatic revenge. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be diminished by it, building a life so full and joyful that those who tried to break you become irrelevant, not through hatred, but through growth. That was my truth at 61. Life can flourish more beautifully after a devastating storm. The strongest roots often grow in soil that has been completely turned over, and it is never ever too late to say, "This life is mine." If you followed my story this far, I have a message for you. Whether you're young or old, trapped in an abusive relationship, or just beginning to recognize the warning signs, you deserve respect. You deserve peace. You deserve a life that is truly yours. And if I, at 60 years old, could find the courage to start over after decades of submission, you can too. It doesn't matter your age, your financial situation, or your fears. The first step is the hardest, but each step after becomes a little easier until one day you find yourself walking, no dancing, toward a freedom you didn't even know existed. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had to start over later in life? I'd love to hear your stories.